And we're live. How's everybody doing on this Thursday afternoon? Because I'm doing great, and I hope everybody's doing great. First thing first, I'd like to thank God for everything that He have done for me, for keeping me alive, because that's the first thing that I'm gonna thank. Because He have protected me, He have given me the breath of life. Without Him, I won't be here, and I won't be in the position that I'm in today. And the second people that I'm gonna thank is everybody that's supporting me, everybody that's subscribing, everybody that's writing or commenting. I'm also going to give thanks to my family members and for people that actually believe in me. Um, and finally, I'm also going to thank myself for not quitting because life is full of a lot of surprises. There's a lot of things that people are going through that you won't see it in the surface. There's a lot of people that are dealing with so many things that they are not, comfortable talking about publicly, but you will see, someone every day just smiling, but you don't know what they're going through. So I'm gonna thank myself for, sticking there, just being strong because life is hard. And for anybody out there, who's going through something, I just want to encourage you to just be able to keep going, strive for greatness, continue putting yourself around people that's able to basically comfort you, support you, and even lead you the right direction. Because there's so many people who are being deceived, so many people who are being led astray because of the things that they are hearing from others, people that they believe, you know, was able to help them and things like that. So today we're going to be talking about the current event. A lot has been going on locally, domestically, globally, internationally. A lot has been going on. We've been seeing a lot of things that have been going on, such as um, protests. We've been seeing a lot of things that have been going on, such as crime, just multiple things that have just been going on. So today we're going to be talking about the current event that have been going on. And usually I didn't cover most of it on my YouTube channel. If you're new to my channel, welcome to The Real Simon Says. My name is Simon. And here in my channel, I usually talk about wide range of things, such as the economy, layoff, inflation, uh, the job market, current event. There's multiple things that I talk about here on this channel, wide range of things. I try not to talk about things that is mostly like degeneracy or gossipish. I try to talk about things that could potentially help people out, potentially put people in position to learn something new, potentially, give someone a news or awareness of what's going on in the world. So today we're going to be talking about current event. Um, there's multiple things that have just been going on when you turn on the news. When you turn on, for example, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, there's just a lot of things that have been going on, and some of it is not even covered, some of it is not even recognized. So today I'm just going to be talking about the current event that I find to be a little bit interesting, that I find to be, you know, something that people or the people that follow this channel to be more aware of. And so the first thing that we're going to be talking about is the announcement that was made, if I'm not mistaken, a couple weeks ago or a week ago by President Donald Trump about autism. Autism. Autism is, I guess, it's a medical condition that some people are born with. And basically, the announcement was that they found that Tylenol, for some reason, is the cause of some autism in the United States, because there's a lot of people in the United States who has autism compared to other countries. When you look at other countries that, such as European country, Asian country, and even African or even South American country, there's not a huge rate of people that has autism. And a lot of people probably will say it has to do with what we consume, such as food or drinks, the medication. because the pharmaceutical company here in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar company, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they have an incentive to provide these medication that is not suitable for the human being and it's causing all this disease. This could be a possibility. There's multiple possibility. And today we're going to be looking at a couple videos of a couple medical experts who are basically warning, saying that the announcement is probably not good because there is no tangible proof that Tylenol is the cause of autism in the United States. There's multiple reasons why. They will try to back it with evidence and based on their research and things like that. And also another current event that we're going to be talking about is the UN speech that President Donald Trump made in New York City. The UN is where a lot of countries gather together to be able to talk about current things that's happening in their country and in the world globally. And we're going to briefly look into that. And then we're going to see what other things is also interesting out there. So first thing first, let's try to look at the speech made by President Donald Trump about
Pause for the facts. Susie here is shopping for a used car, but she doesn't know that nearly half of them have been in an accident.
Interesting.
But Carfax.com shows how accidents impact price, so she doesn't have to overpay. Unpause. Shop the all-new Carfax.com.
Erica Edwards, let me start with you here because you heard the president in extraordinarily clear terms say, don't use Tylenol. As he said, Tylenol. Again, being clear, we're talking about acetaminophen here. Give us a context check on some of this because there are some questions regarding what the president and his health secretary are putting forward.
Yeah, this was an extraordinary announcement, mainly because of the misinformation that I heard from our president. Starting with the numbers of autism cases in the US, he was claiming that it was 1 in, I don't know, whatever thousand, just 20 years ago. Let's put it this way. In 2000, there was 1 in 150 kids with autism in this country. In 2016, it was 1 in 54. Now it's 1 in 31. And experts who have been studying autism for decades say that there's nothing new going on biologically, but it's because we have increased awareness and that we have expanded the definition of autism spectrum disorder overall. As many as 65% of pregnant women take Tylenol sometime in their pregnancy. And so, the doctors I've talked with said that there's absolutely no evidence that linking acetaminophen with autism. In fact, there was a huge study last year published looking at kids with autism and their siblings, right? They have similar genetics, they have similar, environmental exposures. There was no link with that major study. Hallie.
There's another question, too, related to, why pregnant women would be taking acetaminophen in the first place if they have, for example, a fever. We know that some of these expert groups, these medical organizations have said that can actually be very dangerous for pregnant women, too.
Because fevers indicate infection, right? So if you have a fever, you take Tylenol to get rid of that or to sort of bring down your body temperature. Fevers in utero have been linked to dehydration in the developing babies, and that could itself cause problems.
I want to come to Dr. Kavita Patel here, who's been listening along with us. One of the things that Erica referenced to, the idea.
One thing that I can say is our pharmaceutical industry is really messed up because one proof is during the COVID-19, because when the pandemic hit, the pharmaceutical basically, they took control of the US in a way that it surprised a lot of people because they were forcing a lot of people to try to get the vaccine, whether you like it or not. And they were utilizing their power, their lobbying groups, and a lot of people that was inside the government to be able to push throughout the mass public, telling them to be able to take the vaccine. which for me, luckily, I didn't take it because I did not trust the government. I did not trust the guy who was speaking about it, Dr. Fauci, whatever his name was. It seems like, what he was saying just was not, it wasn't clear, because the way the pharmaceutical company was pushing this vaccine towards people, it made a lot of people just wonder, like, what is it really that they're trying to put into our body? And a lot of people got sick. A lot of people also lost their life. But pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer, Johnson and Johnson, they made a lot of money. They made a lot of money during that time. And considering this was during President Donald Trump's first term, and if I'm not mistaken, he seems like he was caught by surprise, because at that time, the economy was doing pretty well. The unemployment rate was pretty low. People were actually, doing pretty well in some level. And then, bam, a COVID-19 just came out of nowhere, surprised a lot of people. It forced the government to basically slow down the economy, or even at some level shut down the economy, because a lot of people now could not be in the office. A lot of people had to resort to working at home, and remote work became very popular. Companies such as Zoom, or like Zoom, became very, very successful because so many people flocked into Zoom to do their daily activity. And many warehouses that required physical labor at the location had to basically shut down momentarily, which forced the government to be able to write stimulus check to be able to support people. In the meantime, they're trying to find ways people can actually contact each other without spreading the COVID-19. So the pharmaceutical company in the United States has been really, really, I guess, suspicious in some sort of way, especially the way they orchestrate some of their things. So a company like a company that make Tylenol, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Kinvu. It used to be owned by Johnson and Johnson, and now they're saying that it could be a case where, it causes autism. But a lot of medical experts are saying that this is not true. We don't know who's telling the truth.
Yeah, that we have a better understanding of autism spectrum disorder, that there is more awareness of it, is why this comparison that the president made to Cuba is one that experts question as well. This idea that Cuba has lower rates of autism because they don't use as much acetaminophen.
Right. We know also that the rates of autism have not necessarily been this massive shift just because of all this causality, which, by the way, even these studies between Tylenol were not done in a way where you could demonstrate that causal link.
Pause there. Can you explain that difference? Because that's super, super important.
Right, so let's take the Harvard study that you just heard about. That was actually what we call a systematic review it's a review of other studies. They included 46 studies, 100,000 people, lots of people, but it was a lot of different studies that were done for different purposes. And then this retrospectively kind of looked and tried to see if there was any association. So I'll give you the analogy. They may have found that people who took Tylenol had children that had some sort of autism spectrum disorder, but they never necessarily also teased out if they had access to prenatal care, if they also had other things that could have contributed to that diagnosis of ASD. So I think to distill it all to some one thing cause the other is actually not reading the study the way that Harvard intended for it to be done.
We've also heard now the administration and these top health officials, as we're listening, obviously keeping an ear on this, wanting to make sure that we're getting the context checks in too, talk about offering folate and the prevalence of folate here to people who do have autism.
Right, and there's been so much that's been talked about, and we're still kind of hearing it unfold, but there has been a leak, and already now we're seeing the demonstration of this kind of link with a potential treatment for autism spectrum disorder. You heard FDA, NIH, CMS, and now the secretary saying that, well, we have this potential that could be a treatment for autism spectrum disorder. Let me be clear. Those studies have been small. They're promising. And I think what it does is it misaligns that we know that autism spectrum disorder is not one thing, and there's not one manifestation. So is there a potential for leucovorin, which is basically a more active form of folate, which is a basic element that we should have in our leafy greens and vegetables? There has been studies that have shown that potentially the uptake of folic acid into the brain is one of many reasons that we can see a representation of autism in children. So I think that it's a very important set of studies to do, but one could argue, and I would, that we have so many other things that we could link and also explore. And so I'm very interested in what the NIH is standing up to understand, are there other studies being done?
Right.
And then I would love to kind of make sure that what I'm worried about right now is that if I'm a mother with a child with autism,
right.
I want to call and get on this medication. It's an oral pill given sometimes in 2 doses a day. Why can't I get it? Well, because we just don't know if that will actually help. And we don't want to give anything that could potentially harm or mislead people from a potential treatment that we don't even have for autism spectrum disorder today.
What if, Erica Edwards, let me go back to you and then we'll get to Vaughn Hilliard. But Erica, if you are a woman who is pregnant right now and you're watching this and you're going, well, wait a second, what am I supposed to do if I catch a cold, if I get a fever, et cetera? The advice is always, of course, talk to your doctor, talk to your personal doctor who knows you and who knows your personal health. But I wonder what you've heard from experts as you've been reporting.
You know, I just found out that most of these doctors, they actually work indirectly for these pharmaceutical companies because they're basically the agent of these pharmaceutical companies to be able to push certain medication towards the population. There's a lot of studies about that. So most of these pharmaceutical companies, they will hire doctors or they will hire experts in those fields to push their agenda so they can be able to sell some of these pharmaceutical ingredients to the public or to test it out indirectly. But we have one of probably, you know, a very different type of medical or pharmaceutical industry compared to other countries, because it seems like, you know, we are in a society where it's more about for profit than about, you know, basically trying to better the population's health or things like that. So it's very interesting. And it just made me wonder, like, yes, they're doing all these studies about autism, but are they also going to do studies for other things such as Down syndrome? What's the cause of Down syndrome? Because that's also another issue here in the United States. What is the cause of Down syndrome here in the United States? And I'm very interested to see if they will be able to do studies of such things.
Bring this out over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, you know, here's the deal. I mean, whether this checks out over time, the damage has been done. Women who are pregnant or are considering getting pregnant are now fearful of Tylenol. They're fearful of acetaminophen. And so that's what folks who I'm hearing from are most concerned about. And so, yes, of course, as you said, talk to your doctor. But yeah, I mean, the fear is already there. President Trump mentioned vaccines. That's also been debunked time and time again. But the fact that, you know, the president of the United States has come out on this national platform to talk about these things is really major, right? And it's something that scientists, doctors have already sort of looked into. And my big question is, you know, why now? Why today is this coming out? Because the doctors I've talked with said there's really no new research that we haven't heard about before that's leading to this particular announcement, other than the fact that the secretary announced that, you know, earlier this year that he would have some sort of answer by September.
I want to explain to you what we're hearing from Kenvue, which is the maker of Tylenol. Again, we're talking more generally about acetaminophen, at least the health secretary is, although you heard the president very directly point to Tylenol here. And Kenvue says that we believe independent sound science clearly shows that taking acetaminophen does not cause autism. They go on to say, we strongly disagree with any suggestion otherwise and are deeply concerned with the health risk this poses for expecting mothers. They say, Dr. Patel, it's the safest pain reliever option for pregnant women as needed. And without it, and this is what I think is what Erica was speaking to too, without it, women face dangerous choices, suffer through conditions like fever that are potentially harmful to both mom and baby, or do something else, use an alternative that could potentially be riskier.
Right. Or
I think a company that actually make Tylenol is taking a huge hit, especially in their stock, because I guarantee you right now their stock is probably declining, because now a lot of people are fearful of taking Tylenol, especially pregnant women. And this will definitely have an impact on how they're operating. This will definitely have an impact how they'll be profiting. this will definitely have an impact how they'll be able to sell their product to the mass population. And when I'm really thinking about this, I really think President Donald Trump used this platform to get back at the pharmaceutical company, because in his first term, they played a pivotal role in him basically, having difficulty, especially running the country when it comes to the COVID-19, because the pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and many other pharmaceutical businesses that we probably don't know about, they played a huge role in basically smear his name, telling the public that, he didn't want the population to be vaccinated. He wasn't sure about it. There's multiple things that played a role. And I think, in my opinion, he's using his platform right now to be able to make them lose a lot of money by smearing things such as vaccine, Tylenol, and all these other companies such as Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson that played a huge role in his first term, basically causing the U.S. economy to shut down or to slow down the economy because of the COVID-19. I think this is just his way of trying to get back from what they have done to him and things like that. So it's very interesting, though, very informative of what these experts are talking about.
Pain. I mean, a lot of what we do is I've got patients who are pregnant with migraines, with headaches, with back pain, all sorts of things. And just weighing the risk and the benefit of acetaminophen for that mother in that situation is exactly what we do. By the way, we don't just say, take as much acetaminophen as you want. We actually have, and the standards for the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the American Medical Association, every single major association has said, use it in a sparing way to weigh the benefit and risks, but not because we see this causal link, but just because we tell that to pregnant women about almost everything.
That's right.
We tell women to avoid non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs because of some risks potentially to the fetus. We tell women to avoid soft cheese because there might be a bacterial infection.
Mm-hmm.
We avoid alcohol
Deli
and
turkey
tobacco.
right,
It's exactly right. So we put this in line with where we see risk and benefit. And this is Tylenol, acetaminophen is one of the safest things we can give.
But now, Von Hilliard, you have the levers of government that are behind this move, from Secretary Kennedy, who noted and longtime vaccine skeptic here, from President Trump as well, as they are suggesting now. Secretary Kennedy says that the FDA is going to initiate the process on the safety label change for acetaminophen here. And some of the language here, I think, is absolutely worth noting, because you heard Secretary Kennedy invoke the phrase, believe all women, which had long been used as a phrase since really the Me Too movement for sexual assault victims and survivors. And his suggestion is that you've also got to believe women, mothers who have children with autism as well. The language around this, obviously political and health announcement, is, I think, worth talking about.
Absolutely. And when you're looking at the two men's relationship, there were a lot of questions that people were speculating whether Secretary Kennedy would be pushed out the door in the past weeks over the firing of the 17 members of the advisory committee on vaccines. And yet we have not heard publicly any reason from the president to question the actions of Secretary Kennedy. And, I was out on the campaign trail with the two men in 2024. And then candidate Trump made very specifically that he was going to let Kennedy, quote, go wild on vaccines and anything else he wanted to go. And so in large part, this moment here at the White House is affirmation from the president of the United States to the decades old work that Secretary Kennedy has taken on. And I think that is where, even in this moment here, you heard the president, sort of playing almost doctor role there in a way that it's hard not to take you back to 2020 during the COVID response to the recommendations that he was providing that typically would come from medical professionals. But the president himself said, quote, Bobby wants to be very careful with what he says, and he should, but I'm not so careful with what I say. And he says taking Tylenol is not good. Don't take it. There's no downside in not taking it. Now, we should be clear. Just minutes later, Secretary Kennedy came out and did, as you guys just outlined, provide the scenarios and reasons why.
I wonder if they're offering a different alternative, because if they're telling pregnant women not to take Tylenol because, they're having headache, they're having fever while they're pregnant, because, when a woman is pregnant, her body is going through a lot of transformation. There's a lot of body fatigue. There's a lot of back pain, leg pain, their feet get swollen. And medication such as Tylenol is actually something that is, I guess, suggested by many people. And even just as a man, you know, if I get a headache or if I feel some kind of body pain or some kind of body ache, the first thing I'm gonna think about is either getting ibuprofen or a Tylenol. So I wonder what is like an alternative that they're offering for a lot of pregnant women who are going through similar situation. You know, will this have an impact on them? Will this have an impact on how doctor, you know, offer pain reliever towards, you know, women who are going through same situations, such as they're having a headache or back pain or some kind of aching in their body because they're pregnant?
Taking Tylenol has long benefited women during pregnancy here. And so I think this is a relationship between the two men. You know, the president suggested that they first met 20 years ago on this. I was at Trump Tower back in 2016 after President Trump won his first race, in which he welcomed Kennedy up to the Oval or up to Trump Tower. And there are a lot of questions about where these two men's relationship would go. And ultimately, President Trump backing the efforts of Secretary Kennedy here in real time.
My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my mother, Samra, and to my origin. Every drop, a new inspiration. Nespresso Samra Origins.
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much for that. We're going to continue to listen in to this event at the White House. Dr. Kavita Patel, Vaughn Hilliard, Erica Edwards. We're going to keep you close as the president is speaking again. Let's actually go in and listen in case he does take a couple of questions here, just for a brief moment.
The term is used throughout this conference. So it's essentially Tylenol. And I just recommend strongly that you don't use Tylenol unless it's absolutely necessary. I understand it's maybe 10% of the women that are pregnant are, would perhaps be forced to use it.
Just worth noting here, again, medical advice from President Trump, who is obviously not a doctor, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. behind him, the health secretary. We're going to continue to listen to this in case the president does take a couple of questions. Let's listen for one more second.
Stronger from me than from the group because they're waiting for certain studies. I just want to say it like it is. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it. If you just can't, it's fight like hell not to take it. There may be a point where you have to, and that you have to work out with yourself. So
obviously he's not a medical expert because he's telling people to fight as hell, and he's asking pregnant women to fight as hell not to take Tylenol. So my question is there another alternative that they're offering pregnant women to take? Or is there a better alternative that they're offering pregnant women to take when they're pregnant? Because there's a difference when you tell someone not to take it, but are you offering a different alternative? Because a woman that's pregnant, as a man, I don't know how that feel. They're going through a lot of estrogen, a lot of emotion and things like that. And, they want to basically get rid of whatever pain that they're going through. And you're telling someone not to take it. So what's a better alternative?
Don't take Tylenol. Other things that we recommend, or certainly I do anyway, is, and it's so important to me to see the doctor 4 times or 5 times for a vaccine. Don't let them pump your baby up with the largest pile of stuff you've ever seen in your life going into the delicate little body of a baby, even if it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. You just break it up into, I would say 5, but let's say 4 visits to the doctor instead of 1. And certain things I think you should do. We've already taken out and are in the process of taking out mercury and aluminum now. You know what mercury is. You know what aluminum is. Who the hell wants that?
President Trump here, again, the manifestation of his health secretary's longtime vaccine skepticism. You're hearing some of the president's. He is just delivering advice to pregnant women who will listen. Dr. Kavita Patel, notable to you what the president's suggesting here.
I think it's kind of stunning because he even acknowledged that his own advisor standing behind him
would not go as far as
he would. So to say pregnant women should not take Tylenol, period, full stop, is pretty unusual. And then to link that somehow to vaccine schedules, as well as linking that to autism, if you can imagine, not just a pregnant woman, but even somebody who's thinking about what they did during their pregnancy is sitting there right now listening to this and thinking, what do I make out of it? And it's very hard when someone with no medical background is kind of offering, unfortunately, medical advice.
And again, we're talking about acetaminophen, which is in Tylenol, and the makers of Tylenol, just to reiterate here, have provided a slew of other studies that they say back up their assertion that they believe that sound science shows that taking acetaminophen does not cause autism.
We thank you for watching, and remember.
Yeah, so this is what I want to talk about, the current event about the autism and Tylenol. So it's kind of interesting seeing that President Donald Trump, he took the front stage talking about, pregnant women who got to fight to be able not to take the Tylenol. He's not a medical expert. I don't think he probably knows what he's talking about. And I'm pretty sure he's surrounded himself with medical experts that can probably give him a better understanding, a better way to basically express, how he talks about this situation. Because for a lot of women, this is a sensitive topic, because us as men, we don't know what their body goes through, especially when they're pregnant. And for women that actually took it in the past, who also has kids who are either have some kind of medical situation such as autism or even Down syndrome, they're probably frustrated, they're concerned. And I think the last thing they need is a president to start giving them advice about how, their body basically should behave when they are going through a pregnancy. So I will prefer like a medical expert, maybe like RFK, to be the one talking about it in depth instead of the president, because I think he has some kind of medical background, or a really respected medical expert that can take the podium and just tell the population about what's really going on, but not the president. As you can see, when he was talking, he was basically blubbering things. You got to fight real hard not to be able to get the vaccine. Well, some people might fight. Some people might be in a lot of pain. Some people might not even be able to, resist some of the pain that they're going through. And they will probably take the Tylenol anyway. But at the same time, the company that actually produced Tylenol is taking a huge hit, especially in their stock, because a lot of companies now are looking at them like, oh, wow, the president just threw you guys under the bus. And this will have a huge impact on them. So they will have to do a huge PR campaign to try to restore their image, to try to restore the image of Tylenol throughout the country, because now a lot of people are concerned about Tylenol. When I heard this news, I was even concerned. I'm like, okay, if they found, Tylenol can potentially, cause women to have babies that have autism, what is the side effect that it can have on people that are just, normal people, or people or like men and young men, young women, or people that are not pregnant? You start raising a lot of questions, and now you start looking at ibuprofen. Could this also be the same thing when it comes to like medicines such as ibuprofen, Advil, and many other over-the-counter product that we basically get when we feel sick or fever or a headache or many other things? So it's kind of interesting to see those type of things. So that's the first thing that I wanted to cover when it comes to current event. The second one that I want to talk about briefly is President Donald Trump UN speech.
Thank you very much. This is indeed the golden.
Not for
Style. And I don't.
this was a much more emboldened President Trump than the first speech. This was a much more emboldened President Trump than the first speech he made there at the UN during his first term. You heard them there early on, essentially trashing the UN and pointing fingers and admonishing some of the countries there in the room, telling some of them that their countries are going to hell in terms of migration. You also you also heard him talk about Palestinian statehood and break from some U.S. allies who are recognizing Palestinian statehood. He said doing so would be rewarding Hamas. He also talked about the war in Ukraine, saying that he thought he could end it because of his relationship with Putin. And he also was really focused on climate change, saying that climate change is a con job. Of course, the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community is that climate change is very real and primarily caused by human behavior. We're going to have Daniel Dale on a little bit later to talk about some of what President Trump said, but I want to start with our Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, what stood out with you with this speech?
Well, Pam, obviously that went way beyond the allotted time limit for any world leader to come and speak at United Nations, maybe even quadruple what the time limit typically is. And basically what you just heard from President Trump amounted to a very forceful lecture to the United Nations about not just the body itself, but also how the world leaders sitting in front of him are running their own countries. That comment that you just noted there, the president said he knows what he's talking about and said a lot of their countries are going to hell in his view. And he started out that speech, Pam, it was quite clear where it was going to go, as he was saying that basically the faulty equipment as he came inside the building here at the United Nations symbolized the uselessness of the United Nations in its current form. He said the United Nations has potential, but that it is not living up to that potential as it is right now. Pam, two things he was talking about. A broken teleprompter, apparently. You could see the president there was reading off of a script in front of him, though he certainly went off script many times during those remarks.
So the UN is an organization that was created, if I'm not mistaken, after World War II, because before that they had the League of Nations, and I guess the League of Nations wasn't as successful as the UN, the United Nations organization that was created after World War II. So far, they always have a meeting, if I'm not mistaken, or the president of the world. They have meeting every year about what's going on in their country. They talk about it in the UN Assembly, and where they come and express about the issues that's bothering them, the issues that's bothering the globe, things such as terrorism, things such as global warming, things such as war, and multiple things. So I guess recently it just happened here in the United States and New York City, and President Donald Trump, he took the stage and then he let them know how he feel about their country and what they're doing, especially when it comes to immigration, circulation, and things like that. And he even said most of these people who are letting their felon, their criminals, and their people to basically come to the United States, they will go to hell, because he's dealing with a lot of immigration issue here in the United States. He has his own problem, but he's taking the time to also lecture some of the heads of state. On top of that, it seems like he wasn't really thinking through with his speech, because it seemed like, the lady said the teleprompter was not working, and whoever wrote his speech seemed like he really had a lot to say, and he had a harsh feeling towards a lot of heads of state that was there.
But also as he came in the building, he and the First Lady were going up an escalator. We were actually standing there in the lobby during that moment, and the escalator kind of malfunctioned and stopped halfway through, and they walked the rest of the way up. But the president mentioned that only moments into his speech, and was basically pointing to that to make his argument and to kind of underscore his point overall here about the United Nations, as he then went on to lecture all of these nations, whether it was on climate change, whether it was on the war in Ukraine, as he was castigating European nations for still importing Russian oil, as that is something that he basically delivered an ultimatum to NATO earlier this month, saying he's prepared to put sanctions on Russia or on countries that continue to buy this oil, but that NATO countries have to stop doing so first. And so obviously nothing surprising in those comments, I'll note, but still remarkable to hear the president come here to the United Nations. And as you noted, Pam, emboldened in his view of how they're running their countries and how he's running his.
Absolutely. It was pretty stunning.
I remember the Secretary of State of the United States by the name of Henry Kissinger once say, to be an American ally, to be an American enemy is dangerous, but to be an American ally is fatal. And when Biden was in power, when the Ukraine war started between Ukraine and Russia, the United States basically were sanctioning the crap out of Russia in so many ways. I think Russia is probably one of the countries in the world that is sanctioned, I think close to 15,000 sanction that Russia has received. And another move that Joe Biden did was he blew up the pipeline that basically Russia used to be able to provide oil and gas to countries such as Germany, Netherlands, and many other countries in Europe, but mainly Germany, because Germany is basically, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest economy in Europe, and second is France. And the US basically blew that pipeline up, basically cutting off European access to Russian oil. And on top of that, the US were offering Europe NGA gas, which was way more expensive than what Russia was providing. And by them receiving those type of gas, it will cause them to basically raise up all their production. Their production costs will go high. Everything that they produce, whether it's machinery, food, manufacturing, and many other things, it will go up because they got to get gas from the US probably 5 times more than what they were getting from like Russia and many other countries. So most of them decided to go to places such as United Arab Emirates and countries like in Nigeria or even Algeria to provide them a little bit more cheaper gas because of the location, because they're a little bit much closer to Europe than the United States. And I think Trump, he didn't like the fact that they were still trying to buy oil from Russia through other ships and other means, which it makes sense for European because Europe is much closer to Russia than Europe is closer to the United States. So the fact that US has to transport all their oil across the Atlantic, it will cost more. It will take a little bit more time for it to arrive. And the European, they're dealing with a lot of issues that, that's going on recently. France is dealing with a lot of budget cuts. They're dealing with a lot of protests. And France is dealing with many other things that's going on. Same thing with Germany and the UK. So for them, I think it's much more beneficial for them to be able to get oil that's close by, which is by Russia or the United Arab Emirates or even part of North Africa and West Africa compared to getting to the United States. But President Donald Trump, he doesn't like that. He wants them to be able to buy 100% American oil, and he even threatened to sanction them if they don't. Now, that's what you call being imperialism or being, a hegemony, or because they have a huge hegemony, especially in places like Europe, where they want to continue to control.
Actually, and we at points, Caitlin, when he was admonishing some of the countries, he mentioned Germany, for example, that the camera would pan to that world leader, and many of them were just stone-faced as the president was doing this. I think many of these world leaders were prepared for the kind of Donald Trump we saw here today. What do you think?
Yeah, and he's meeting with a lot of these world leaders, I'll also note, while he's here. I mean, he's just delivering the speech, but he's got meetings with President Zelensky, with a lot of the Middle East leaders later on when it comes to the creation of a Palestinian state, as he's been rebuking Canada, France, and all of these other European nations for recognizing a Palestinian state. So this is only just the beginning as he's going to go and meet with all of these leaders.
And I know you'll be covering all of that. Thank you so much, Caitlin. I want to bring in Christiana Amanpour and pick up on what Caitlin was talking about with President Trump essentially admonishing some of these countries when it comes to migration. He talked about how the UN is funding uncontrolled migration. Let's listen to specifically what he said and talk on the other side.
Have you ever wanted to see your home from space? With this free satellite Earth Maps tool, you can zoom right down to your exact.
It's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the number one political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders.
Christiana, what do you make of those comments?
Pamela, I differ slightly from Caitlin. I was actually really amazed by the level of vitriol that the President of the United States delivered to his allies, mostly to his allies, let's just face it. Talking about your countries will fail to the Europeans, saying that he had met President Lula for 39 nice seconds, but then banging them over the head again with the cudgel of tariffs. Don't forget, the US has a tariff or a budget surplus with Lula. If you remember, his first inaugural talked about American carnage. This was a speech about global carnage as he sees it. This, in every single instance, was used to deliver a hammer blow against almost every nation in the world. Everything, using the United Nations podium to spout conspiracy theories about green agendas. Of course, he's correct about uncontrolled migration. He has identified that issue. But the way he talks about how your countries will fail, there are many European countries who've actually implemented European standards on various migrations and the rest. And I'm going to be speaking to the Prime Minister.
The way it sounds like Donald Trump is trying to patronize some of these head of state, because he understands that most of the head of state depends directly or indirectly to the United States. Whether we like it or not, United States is probably one of the biggest economy in the world. And it's kind of hard for you to be a head of state and not associate yourself with the United States in some sort of way, whether it's economic, whether it's business, whether it's monetary, whether it's finance. Because keep in mind, the US dollar is still the global reserve currency. Yes, it's taking a lot of challenges right now, especially with the creation of BRICS, which they're planning on creating some kind of currency that will be able to compete with the US dollar as a global reserve currency. And that type of move will basically have a huge impact on how the United States basically operate throughout the world. Because part of the United States hegemony, part of United States dominance throughout the world and towards many other countries is the control that they have with the US dollar, because the United States basically imposed the US dollar as a global currency, which countries now have to go through the dollar system to be able to make trade based on the resource or many other exchange that they have as a country. And if the United States just wake up one morning, doesn't like the country, most likely they will sanction them and they will cut them off using the dollar, which it makes it hard for them to be able to trade their raw material, their product, and just to be inside the world economic, which it makes it really difficult for that country to be able to get some kind of revenue. They got to go find other means to be able to provide for themselves. For example, prime example is countries such as North Korea. North Korea basically is isolated from the world, but they still trade with countries such as Russia and China. But those two countries, Russia and China, they're superpowers. So whatever the United States tell them, most likely they won't listen to the United States. But when you look at countries such as like Iran, the U.S. basically try to cripple them with a lot of crippling sanction. Prime example is also Cuba. The U.S. been sanctioning Cuba for the past 60 years since 1960, if I'm not mistaken. And until now, the U.S. is continuing sanctioning them, put them in a lot of embargo where they can't really trade with many other countries or surrounding countries. And if any country really try to trade with Cuba, the United States will put their fist down. A couple countries does operate, with Cuba, such as China and Russia, but it's actually in a small scale. Then you have the most current one is Venezuela. Venezuela is a country in South America. And when you look at the history of Venezuela with President Chavez, how things went down between President Chavez and the United States government at the time, where he got kicked out and he got brought back in by the people. And ever since that, he's been basically fighting the U.S. to not come and take in their oil. Because what people don't understand is Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia. It's probably the #1 country in the world with the most reserve oil. And for me, in my opinion, I think United States is using Venezuela, trying to use Venezuela oil to be able to have access to cheaper oil that is close by to the United States compared to going to the Middle East. Because I'm pretty sure the U.S. government understands that in the Middle East, things are about to go haywire again between Israel and Iran. Because I think another round 2 of war between Israel and Iran will start. And Israel and Iran is located in the Strait of Hormuz, where, if I'm not mistaken, 20 to 30% of the global oil passes through. And most likely, if that war really takes off again, most likely the oil that goes through that Strait of Hormuz will cripple a lot of countries' economy. And I think the U.S., even though we still have our own oil here in the United States by Texas and some in Alaska, they're trying to find other reserve oil that they can use that's close by. And I think Venezuela is probably a good place to put their imprint in to make sure that if things pop off in Iran, in Israel, in the Middle East by the Strait of Hormuz, we can try to get that oil in Venezuela, which is much closer. It's inside our hemisphere. They can utilize the, what is it called? The Monroe Doctrine, basically stating that, this hemisphere is ours and we don't want no other country such as China or any other superpower such as Russia to come here and get involved in our affair in a Western hemisphere. That's just my theory.
Of Spain about it, as well about Palestinian statehood. I'm going to be speaking to the foreign minister of Brazil about what the president said about Brazil. But it was an incredible broadside. And what wasn't said was how he was going to actually intervene and use American power and its leverage, unique American power and its leverage, to stop the wars that are happening in Europe and in the Middle East. These are the biggest issues plaguing the world right now, apart from the climate and certain aspects of immigration. But he didn't, and he kept saying that, I will sanction Putin when Europe sanctions. Well, let's face it, the countries that buy the most oil from Russia right now are Trump's closest friends and Putin's closest allies. Hungary, Orban, Slovakia, Fico, and Turkey of Erdogan. These are very, very, admired by the president of the United States. And these are the ones who are buying the most Russian oil right now. So it was a very...
ChatGPT, what's a future-proof business in 2025?
A future-proof business in 2025?
On script, off script kind of speech. Some of the things he said when he was on script were, it was written fairly decently. And some of the stuff that he said when he was off script went into this idea, as I said, of global carnage and conspiracy theories. And, they're condemned to disaster. They're condemned to failure. These were to his allies. Let's just say one more thing. The president of the United States could do a lot of stuff with allies. It's very, very difficult for the United States to try to achieve what the president says the United States wants to achieve without alliances. And as these nations try to manage Trump in Trump 1.0, you can see by the reaction that the idea of managing Trump and humoring him is over now. They've got to just try to figure out how to weather the worst of this storm and hope that what he says off script is not what he means in bilateral conversations with them. Pamela?
Yeah, we'll see, because he has several meetings coming up. We'll see how they go, because several of them are with U.S. allies. And
Politics is basically a two-edged sword, because in the morning, a politician will tell you, yeah, we're friends. At night, they're telling you we don't like each other. And most of these politicians, most of these head of state, in my opinion, I think they call each other and they be laughing and talking, about, how much money they made and, who's more powerful. I don't think they're enemies. I think President Donald Trump is probably secretly good friend with the president of China and with the president of Russia and with other many presidents. Same thing when we look at our political system here in the United States. You got two-party. We got a two-party system. And for some people, they might think, they're basically polar opposite of each other. But when you really dig deep, you realize that we live in a uniparty system, meaning basically you have a one body, which is like a bird, and then you have the right wing and the left wing. So they both basically need each other to be able to function, to fly. And they're giving you an illusion that they're separated, that they're against each other, but in reality, they're together. Prime example is when there's a war that happened. Let's say a Republican started a war. Once a Republican president get out of power, the person who comes in, if it's a Democrat, he will continue that war. So it doesn't really change. Maybe just their approach is a little bit different compared to each other, but the goal is always the same. Another example is, for example, when President George W. Bush started a war in Afghanistan, he put the U.S. Army basically as a forefront, as the leading force to be able to try to fight in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and all these other countries like France, UK, they joined in, basically not knowing why they joined in, because I guess the US is like their boss. They joined in. So that's the method. When you look at the war that happened in Libya, the United States, when President Obama was in power, the United States basically took a back seat. They let France and the UK to take the lead of bombing the crap out of Libya, destroying the whole country of Libya. So the Republican, the Democrat, when it comes to war, they take a different approach, but the objective is always the same.
And to extend on the point you were making, Christian, how he treated U.S. allies in the room there, he also further isolated the U.S. from U.S. allies when it comes to recognizing Palestinian statehood, saying that doing so would be a reward for Hamas. He also called on Hamas to release all the hostages. Now, I want to play that sound and actually bring in Jim Sciutto after to get his take.
Some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much. This could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
Jim, what is your reaction for those comments at a time when?
So far, multiple countries has recognized Palestine as a country. And countries like United States and Israel, they don't like that. And it's kind of frustrating for them, because now you will see a wave of other countries doing the same thing, recognizing Palestine. But when you look at the image that's happening in Gaza, how many people are being bombed, how many buildings being destroyed, you're seeing kids being starved. It's kind of shocking to just, just to see things like that in 2025. because there's multiple, you know, things that's happening in the world. And I think the Gaza situation is really, really touching for a lot of people, because we live in a world where we said we will not allow something like this to happen again after World War II. But now we're seeing this happen, and a lot of the perpetrators, which is coming from Israel, are basically, you know, saying they just got to release the hostage. But when you really dig deep and you look at some of the experts that are talking about this situation, they say this was basically already planned ahead of time, because the goal is basically to eradicate all the people in Gaza, to either kick them out, send them through the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, or just eliminate them, so that area of Gaza can be used for some kind of resort, where you can see even online, Trump posted AI video of Gaza as this nice resort where a lot of wealthy people will be coming there and just hanging out for vacation and things like that. So it's kind of sad, you know, if you're like a person from Gaza seeing those type of things, you know, knowing that your homeland is about to be taken because you have a lot of gritty elites in the United States, even in Israel, who are planning on taking your land. And it's kind of sad. But this war between Israel and Hamas, you know, it's something that I think it can expand. It will get bigger. And in my opinion, I think at the end of this year, I think Israel is trying to start another front war with Iran, because it seems like they need to basically just terrorize their neighbors, because keep in mind, they're having issue with Lebanon. They have issue with Syria. They have some kind of issue with Iraq. They have some kind of issue with Iran. They're also looking to have issue with probably Pakistan after they get rid of Iran. But Pakistan is a nuclear power. But in my opinion, I think they might utilize India, because if you understand the situation between India and Pakistan, you will know that, you know, they don't like each other. So I'm guessing Israel will try to use India to be able to put Pakistan, you know, in an uncomfortable situation. And also on top of that, Turkey. There's multiple things that's happening in that region, and Israel is also the center of it.
And as I mentioned, several U.S. allies like Canada and France are recognizing Palestinian statehood.
Well, that was the one line from the president's speech that got applause from those assembled, because there is, of course, broad and understandable agreement that everyone wants the hostages to come home. The thing is that even from inside Israel, and even from inside Prime Minister Netanyahu's own leadership, some of the former leaders, they say that the Israeli prime minister is not prioritizing the hostages, and that by expanding military action on the ground, he's endangering their lives. There are open questions in Israel about Israel's priorities as relates to that war. And Trump himself has expressed impatience in the past with the Israeli leaders' focus on bringing that war to an end. But now, based on his comments today, it does not appear that he is putting any limits or any new pressure on Israel to bring that conflict to the end, acknowledging fully that, of course, Hamas is very much a player in this as well, and is the one holding those hostages.
Build a website you love with Wix, where your words create.
I like to speak my mind, speak the truth, as we seek.
Boom, 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 boom. So far today, I just want to talk about the current event that been going on throughout this whole week. I know some of it is probably like a week old, like the announcement on autism and Tylenol, but I kind of wanted to briefly run through it just to give my own opinion about it, and also about the UN speech that President Donald Trump made. And I just wanted to give my own opinion about what's going on. So here in this channel, we talk about current event, we talk about economy, we talk about multiple other things. And if you're new to my channel and if you want to support me, please make sure you like, you share, you subscribe, and I will really appreciate it. And I would like to hear your comment in the comment box about these topics, about the autism, about Tylenol, about the UN speech that President Donald Trump made. You know, so appreciate you guys for all listening. And until next time, peace.